Nice if I unmute myself, right? Can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Hi, hello again. Hello from Warminster, Pennsylvania, 15 hours in the past.
Sorry, I had my mic muted. Yes, loud and clear.
All right, excellent. Okay, well, we just finished the viewing of the dish. We all enjoyed it, but I did preview for everybody that we wanted to talk to the people that were really doing that work with communications, and that I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to learn the real story about Australia's contribution to manned spaceflight communications. And I know it's a lot more than just Apollo 11. So what I'd like to do is, since I've only got one microphone here, but you can see our room here this evening, I will relay questions
Yes.
that people may have. And please feel free to make any remarks that you'd like to make. And Colin, I think you're on mute.
Oh.
That's right. I'll keep muted so I don't disturb things until called on.
Okay, no problem. What I would like to do before we start the Q&A, Mike, if you could introduce yourself briefly, and then Colin, so people here in Warminster are aware of your work.
Okay. I spent the majority of I'm electronic engineer, British born and raised and educated. Came to Australia in 1960, and then the majority of my career was associated with the spacecraft tracking industry business. We've traditionally had quite a number of tracking facilities starting right back at the earliest John Glenn flight, for example, and a big tracking station on our west coast at Carnarvon. But most of the recent tracking has been done near Canberra in what's called the Australian Capital Territory, a bit like DC in some ways. And we had 3 active facilities here at one time. One antenna station handling the manned flight Apollo missions, one handling the unmanned deep space missions, and one handling the Earth orbiting missions. So were three fairly distinct for systems for a while. In addition, the Parkes one that you've just been watching is about 200 miles north of Canberra. Anyway, just going back to where I came in, I arrived here in 1966 as the deputy director of the Deep Space Station. After 18 months, I went to the Honeysuckle Creek manned spaceflight station, which is the Apollo station. I was there through the early Apollo, and in particular, Apollo 7, 8, and 10, 11, 12, 13. I then went back to Tidbinbilla, had a year in JPL Pasadena in 1972, whilst the big new dish at Tidbinbilla, Tidbinbilla being the Deep Space Station, was brought online. And it was brought up in time to support Apollo 17. So I used that as an excuse to be at Houston for Apollo 17. Got to sit on one of the control consoles, and second most highlight of my career was to send some commands to Apollo 17. I then had 10 years away from space tracking in our defense world. I could chat to that if anybody is interested. I ended up being on team selecting the P-3C Orion for Australian maritime aircraft, and the F-18 as a fighter, and various other defense projects. But got the opportunity to go back to the Deep Space Station, we call it Tidbinbilla, in 1983 as the deputy director, and working with Parkes on really what was at least equally important, if not more important than what you've just watched. Parkes was very vital to the support of the Voyager spacecraft flying past Uranus in about 84, and then flying past Neptune in the late 80s. And so I was a deputy director coordinating that work with Parkes. Went back and forth to Parkes many times. And then I became director after 5 years in 1989 and was there until the 25th anniversary of Apollo 11 in 1994. And I've been retired ever since. So that's my background. Colin is the guru of his fantastic website, honeysucklecreek.org. It started out .net, so I got that wrong. honeysucklecreek.net. It started out as just Honeysuckle, with Col concentrating on what Honeysuckle Creek did in the manned flight, but it has expanded and expanded and expanded, and it now covers anything to do with Australian space and most other facilities around the world, in California, for example, in the desert, and in Spain, Madrid, as well as being on first name terms with various astronauts and ex-NASA administrators. So Cole does an absolutely unbelievable job. He got an award, by the way, in the Australian Honours System for this work. And when it comes to an exercise like this, Cole can readily lay his hands on relevant pictures and clips. So that's why I've asked him to be on. Okay, was that do, Eleanor?
I think that'll be fine. Just so you know, your connection might be a little wonky at times, but I think we can still hear you. But I just wanted to let you know that. Colin, maybe you can introduce yourself and talk a little bit about honeysucklecreek.net as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, I'm a geologist by profession, although after working in geology for a while, I became a pastor, and I've just 18 months ago retired as pastor of a church in Western Sydney. And I've been working with Mike for the last 23 years now. Yeah, nearly 25 years on this. And it's been a great privilege to do something to share the heritage of and those who worked with him. And people are really excited, of course. Having seen the dish, they say, well, that's great. And then we say, well, this is even better than that as well. So it's a lot of fun, and there's just a lot of documentation that if it isn't looked after and scanned, it's just going to disappear. A lot of photos and videos and things like that.
Yeah,
yes, Cole does a great job in archiving stuff.
Yeah, I was going to we really appreciate that, you know, like some of the historical preservation efforts we try to do here in Warminster, we really do appreciate the work that you're doing there. And please continue that, because it's really vitally important. I don't know, I think, Colin, you mentioned you may have some photographs, and we were happy to have you show those. And then maybe we could open up the floor for a few questions, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Well, is the best way, Mike, for you to talk through a few things?
Yeah, Eleanor, I think the better way is for me to sort of introduce some of these pictures. I think, Cole, maybe we can start with that clip about the TV. Before it rolls the clip, let me say, despite what that movie effectively almost said, not quite, the TV of the very first step that went to the world was not taken from Parkes. It was taken from Honeysuckle. Actually, at the time, Houston was receiving television not only from Australia, but also from Goldstone in the California desert. Goldstone also had a big dish, just in passing, but for a myriad of different reasons, their picture was no better than the one we were receiving on the smaller antenna. And just before the first step, Houston TV selects the Australian honeysuckle picture in preference to Goldstone. And by the way, Parkes wasn't receiving TV. Its dish wouldn't go below 30 degrees, and so the moon hadn't yet quite risen at Parkes. So if you could play the clip, Col.
Sure. So this is starting. This picture at the beginning is the picture from Goldstone, which is very dark and hard to work out what's going on. And then after a few seconds, it gets better, and you hear Ed Tarkington in Houston saying, "Just switch to Honeysuckle." So I'll play a bit of that and see how it goes.
Buzz, this is Houston. F2, 1/160th second for shadow photography on the sequence camera.
Okay. I'm at the foot of the ladder. The lamp footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches. Although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. Ground mass is very fine. I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So there you are. That's what actually happened. The movie doesn't quite say the TV came from Parkes, but it certainly leaves that impression. And so, from my point of view, that is probably the most disconcerting, misleading aspect of a movie, which, however, I have to say, was great entertainment. It's about 70 or 80% accurate. I'm glad it was made. And at the beginning, it says based on activities. And I've learned that when a Hollywood or when a movie has the word based from, it's a documentary. The term docudrama gets thrown about as one other way of putting it. So there you go.
Do you want
Eleanor?
to see the switch, the thanks to Parkes at the end?
Oh yes, yes, a good point. After about 7 or 8 minutes, the Parkes dish comes out of its limits. The moon rises above the 30-degree elevation, and they get and therefore a good picture comes from Parkes, and Cole will roll a clip, which, among other things, includes a thanks from Houston about giving the best picture yet. So go ahead, Cole.
All right, you're going to get to that just as soon as they finish these pictures.
Right, you might pass on to the Parkes people if their labor was not in vain. They've given us the best TV yet.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. We'll appreciate it. Good morning.
So did you catch that? That Houston saying they've given us the best TV yet? The person responding from the station was my boss, Tom Reed, who was the director at the time. Back to you, Eleanor.
Yeah, I have never seen or realized what the images were from Australia versus Goldstone, but it definitely, I think you can definitely appreciate the difference and how much clearer the high and better resolution the Australian feed was, which is pretty remarkable. So glad you guys were working the satellite dishes down there. All right. I don't know.
As it turned out on the day at Goldstone, they had 2 shifts. So go ahead.
I didn't know if you had any additional footage that you wanted to share, or if we wanted to open up the floor for questions.
You could, yeah. There's a picture of the Honeysuckle Creek station. Had an 85-foot dish and it where I worked through the Apollo 7 through 13. By the way, Apollo 13 was our biggest challenge. We were tracking almost as the explosion occurred. That's another view of the dish, which actually has been relocated. It was dismantled and relocated near to the Deep Space Station, and it's still there today, but it hasn't been operational for a few years now. But it's now a National Heritage facility. That was a good. It was up in the mountains, about 1,000 feet higher than we are here in Canberra. We got snow up there a few times. 143, Cole. Have you got that?
Yes.
That's the big dish at. You'll hear me keep using its name, Tidbinbilla. That is the location of the deep space tracking on behalf of NASA, and still very, very active today. It's got about 8 or 10 dishes now. That particular one was an adaptation from the Parkes design. The Parkes design was a British design, but JPL in the early 60s came out to Australia, spent 6 weeks looking at the Parkes design, and then adopted it for use by JPL in the Deep Space Network. And you'll notice one of the big differences. Look at the diameter of the pedestal. The Parkes pedestal is really under not big enough. And so the JPL one is at least twice, if not 3 times the diameter. This means that the big dish at Tidbinbilla can track up to about 50, 60 mile an hour winds, whereas the Parkes one can't. And the Parkes one can only tilt over to 30 degrees elevation. The big one at Tidbinbilla can go down to 0 elevation. Nevertheless, you can plainly see the family resemblance between the 2 dishes. I think, that's me as a littlie. I didn't have a grey hair
Deputy
then.
Director.
My job was to run the operations at the station. I was a public service employee, and there's one that illustrates what I was doing during Apollo 11, the early part. I was coordinating directly with Parkes, and my boss, Tom Reed, sitting in front. He was coordinating the Honeysuckle station. And in particular, the Parkes people had what was called an offset feed. It was a slightly offset at the apex, and they could receive a signal earlier than the 30 degrees, which they did. And the director at Parkes assumed for 20 years that signal, that TV signal they got, was the one that went to the world. But I kept telling them it didn't. And eventually I did get an agreement with my friends at Parkes that the offset feed TV was not fed to the world. There we go. I think it's about all the relevant. Oh, there's one of me at work there. That's me at work. Oh, that picture found its way onto the back of a coin on the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, an adaptation of that. All right, Eleanor, over to you.
All right, thank you. No, that's great. Thank you for sharing those. Are those photographs and the videos on honeysucklecreek.net if people wanted to view them again?
Yes, they're all there.
Okay,
They're all
great.
there. And another 1,000 or more.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm going to open it up to the floor. Okay, we do have one question in the back.
You mentioned the number one thing that you thought the movie fictionalized. What would be your number 2 and number 3? Things that were not correct in the movie.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard that, but did you hear the question? What were you mentioned number one?
Not quite. Say again, Eleanor.
Sure. So the question was, you mentioned the number one thing that bothered you about, inaccuracy in the movie, but what would you say was number 2 and number 3?
Oh, well, it's hard to say. Number 2 was the indication of the all-knowing NASA representative. We did not have a NASA representative at the stations, any stations. In fact, they were actively kept out. Australia's always liked its, valued its sovereignty in these situations. And so we had a NASA rep in Australia, but he wasn't at the station. That's maybe a minor point. The other thing, at one point in the movie, they say Parkes go for command, which was quite wrong. Parkes did not have a transmitter. And so there was no way they could command the spacecraft, whereas at Honeysuckle, I would call when we'd acquired and we had the transmitter going up, I would call to Houston, Honeysuckle, go for command. I think the movie makers picked up on that phrase and just threw it into the mix to make things sound fun. Also, Houston never talked directly to Parkes. They talked to us at Honeysuckle and we talked to Parkes. So that was a bit misleading. Oh, we had the Prime Minister of Australia, John Gorton, visit on the morning of Apollo 11 at Honeysuckle. The Prime Minister didn't go to Parkes. However, I don't want to feel I try not to be nitpicky in this. The fundamentals of Australia having a significant, if not major, contribution to the success of Apollo 11 does come through in the movie.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Maybe Mike can tell the story about the TV being upside down initially.
Oh, so the question was, Mike, can you tell the story that you told Steve and I about the television transmission being upside down initially?
You're
Yeah, so
cutting
the
out.
question was
say again,
about the television being
sorry about
upside
that,
down at the start.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the initial picture, which again is online, if anyone wants to go and find it on Cole's website, the initial picture taken from Goldstone was upside down. And the reason it was upside down was the camera was mounted on the base of the lunar module. And when Armstrong came out onto what was called the porch, that's the top of the ladder, he pulled a lanyard that deployed that camera. It pivoted out. But because of the geometry of fitment, the camera was upside down. And so the picture that came to the ground, came to the earth, was upside down. But this was anticipated. And there was a beautiful big ginormous switch on the there we go. There's the switch, which was on the scan converter specifically to cope with this very circumstance. In other words, that switch had to be in the inverse position when the camera came on. The operator at Goldstone was not the first shift. He wasn't the prime shift, partly because the astronauts had come out early. They were supposed to have slept, but they came out early. So the poor operator at Goldstone had that switch in the wrong position. Mind you, within 10, 15 seconds, it was corrected. And if you're curious about it, there is a clip on that.
If you look carefully at that picture, this is taken at Goldstone.
Yeah.
On the 4th of July, 1969, you can see the switch is up there. It doesn't have a label on it, up on the right, and on the right-hand side is Walter Cronkite.
Oh, yeah.
Who went out to Goldstone to record a feature for the news to be shown during Apollo 11.
And it's worth mentioning that the scan converter was really, really poor. The signal that came down from the moon was 10 frames per second, and I think about 400 lines, or maybe less, 200 lines. And it was converted to the NTSC American Standard by displaying that incoming signal on a cathode ray tube, and then pointing a camera at it, which ran at the NTSC standard. And there was a great loss in fidelity between what came down and when it was converted. And so it's a shame that the original as it came down wasn't shown to the public. Colin may be able to find a Polaroid picture. There was a Polaroid picture taken of the image coming down before it was scan converted, and it's quite a contrast to the one that came out. So it mind you, excuse me, I'll just hang up here.
That's one of the pictures taken at Honeysuckle Creek during the moonwalk. And if you were to compare it with the same frame as was received in Houston, this is so much better.
That's remarkable. I never appreciated that at all. Yeah.
He was yeah.
Yeah, so there you are. That was the quality coming in. And when it was converted, lost a great deal. I just got a visitor arriving. Anyway, we'll get by. I tried to forestall this by saying, don't come till 1 o'clock. Where's it going? It's leaving now. Oh, what the heck? Sorry, where were we?
All right, yeah, we do have another question.
Did Honeysuckle or Parkes ever track the Russian S-band beacons?
Did Parkes or Honeysuckle Creek ever track the Russian S-band beacons?
No, I'm not aware that Russians used S-band, by the way. No, we never tracked anything Russian. In fact, I enjoyed the job at the tracking station because everything was completely unclassified. I'd spent 10 years in our defense department living with classifications, and it was really, really refreshing to be able to genuinely say we didn't do anything. We didn't track Russian spacecraft. We didn't track American satellites looking over the Middle East. I did have one incident, mind you. There was a launch of a classified shuttle mission one time when I was director, and we were scheduled to track it. And I, as the director, said, no, I'm not going to track it. I'm not going to compromise the fact that I can always say everything we do is unclassified. And they said, well, there is this system of mariner in distress. There's an international treaty whereby if there's a mariner in distress, everybody has to support. And that, I gather, by somebody's interpretation, applied also to any space flight. So it said, you should be tracking. I said, look, to the NASA rep here. I said, you come out the station, I'll be out there. If you tell me it's a mariner in distress, we'll track. Otherwise, we won't. And so that's how I got around the classifiedness of it. But no, we never tracked anything Russian. Oh, by the way, the Parkes dish is quite active today, very active in terms of radio astronomy, but also it's active in providing support to these latest NASA missions, which are classed as sort of private missions, although they're funded by NASA, as I understand it. But these private missions sort of have to arrange their own ground tracking capabilities, and some of them are working with Parkes. So Parkes nowadays, for example, that blue ghost that landed on the moon 3 or 4 weeks ago was tracked by Parkes. So they still have a role in lunar missions.
Interesting. Any other questions in the room? Oh, okay. I think we're all questioned out over here. It is getting a bit late for us over here.
All right.
But I think
understand. It's just coming up to midday here.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a good movie. Everybody's enjoyed it, and it's still around. It's still shown and reshown 25 well, yeah, 25 years on.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
all
exactly.
right, Eleanor. Well, it was good fun. Anytime you want anything along these lines. Oh, I mean, I could talk more generally to Apollo if anybody ever wants to, but anytime that suits.
Well, we very much appreciate that. And Colin, thank you for your time and the show and tell. I definitely want to take some time to look on honeysucklecreek.net. So very much appreciate it and really appreciate your time this evening to compliment our movie night here. So thank you again.
Thanks very much.
All right. Take care.
Okay,
Bye.
see ya.
All right. Bye-bye.